Yes.
So in passing, when we were talking about fighting ability, you said that you have to use a log transformation of age because men who were highly ranked in this regard actually had lower fertility.
Some of the oldest.
Yeah. So that makes me wonder whether a different form of balancing selection might be going on, or if it's telling us about cost. That is, if these guys are more formidable than when they're younger, but they senesce more rapidly, then that would explain your pattern. So I know you have a lot of anthropometrics on these guys. Do you have anything on testosterone levels? Do you have any immune parameters that would allow you to speak to that?
Yes. So I'm currently looking at a lot of markers of stress, health, immune function. So I could. I can't give you a clear answer to that right now. That's interesting.
I just wanted to follow up on that. Is there something else that, like medicine or something like that, that could have caused, I mean, you know, if his conditions haven't been the same over the last 40 years, the older guys could just be having less because they have better access to healthcare now.
Right. I mean, you know, with the age scale, hopefully you're comparing individuals
Within
their age, for a particular age. But that said, I'd want to address any kind of cohort effects that are going on, and so, when I start to analyze my longitudinal data, I'll definitely pay attention to that. But so I think it's also particular to the villages where I work. It just so happened, and I don't know if this is emblematic of that particular age cohort in general across Chimani society or just the villages I worked in, but some of the oldest guys happen to have slightly less children than you predict for their age.
For the Barbasco fishing, did you compare the single-family events with the multi-family events? Because I get the feeling with the Shuar, you get a similar thing where everybody divides it equally, but they prefer to go on the big party ones because they can Barbasco like the river with more people, and they get bigger fish. And it would be interesting to see if it's non-linear, they could actually get more fish per person if they are in a bigger group.
All the events are in the same river, but that said, there could be some kind of economies of scale going on. And I didn't look at the single household Barbasco events mainly because it usually involves only one adult male or his brother.
Right.
And so
they might even, if they Barbasco the same river, they might use some fish and
Yeah.
them all, or they don't die.
Well, it's really, observationally, what's interesting is that, people who have been organizing this Barbasco have done all the work. The tail end of all the work, some other random people just show up, take some fish, and nobody says anything about it.
How much, and what's the nature of the work that they do? Because, that's also has to be different from the Shuar, because in the Shuar, it's just like, hey, let's go Barbasco fishing. So that guy might be called the leader to just log it up, but he doesn't actually do it.
Right. So when we asked about who organized this event, and specifically said, okay, who's the person that said, hey, let's do this, came with the idea, that said, hey, can you do that, get the plans, can you get the materials for the dam, and these are also people who actually participated in all those activities too. In terms of whether it's really costly, I can't say for sure, but more costly than doing nothing.
This was a question from someone at Fullerton. So, in games with leaders, most of the leaders gave the smallest amount to someone else, right? It was only 2 out of 6 cases that they gave the smallest amount to themselves. So, they want to know if you know anything about who they gave the smallest amount to.
Yeah, there were people, every single one of those 4 times, somebody who was identified in my post-game interviews as being lazy, who made mistakes, but not just due to accident, but people said, no, they're just not focusing or paying attention. That said, though, they didn't directly bring that up when they were dividing the spoils, because they really tried hard to divide everything equally. They even said, hey, I'll give you some food tomorrow if you just take this lower payout.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Assuming that there's a genetic component that can be assigned to these traits you were evaluating, do you think that the predictive power of the models you were using goes beyond these communities?
Sure. Looking at some of the evidence from other small-scale societies, the relationship between these status measures of status or proxies for status for example, hunting ability has been looked at the most, does tend to correlate pretty strongly with measures of fertility, offspring survivorship. So I think across small-scale societies, there is definitely this effect. What's of interest is that in modern societies that are post-demographic transition, often you will not see, especially in women, income and education relates negatively to fertility. So, within small-scale societies, the trend is pretty apparent. Outside of that, maybe not. Although there is evidence that looking at men and controlling for education, income is a strong predictor of fertility in modern industrialized societies.
Yeah.
So you speculated that one way to explain the relationship between male status and fertility as mediated by age of wife was that people are forecasting sort of future social status at,
Yeah.
when the men are still fairly young. In that regard, I'm curious how much female choice there is. So who's doing the forecasting, right? Is it the women who are doing the forecasting? Is it their parents or their fathers?
We know about a third of marriages are sort of arranged, informally, but nevertheless arranged. So I think there's as much value in impressing women as impressing other community members. So yeah, that's another question. But I wouldn't say it's just developing a reputation with eligible mates themselves, but with their family members. Yeah. I can't say how much is due to one or the other.
So, I thought it was very interesting, the graphic also showing side-by-side dominance and prestige, the 4 quartiles for each. And there was a suggestion in the data of perhaps a more sort of stepwise function where the highest quartile in the dominance graph seemed to have sort of, better fitness payoffs relative to the 3 other quartiles. And the prestige one seemed to be more like a sort of continuous-ish trend.
Yeah.
In general, I'm just interested in whether you have reflections on that, but also I'm interested in whether you know if that pattern has ever been found in other studies, if other studies have looked at these 2 dimensions in similar societies.
Most studies in the small-scale societies publish data. I just find the correlations, and so I should look more closely at some of the data to see where that correlation coming from. Is it from the top decile, bottom decile? What's driving it? But at least from my data, I suspect with dominance is sort of a winner-take-all thing, where if you're strongest guy around, there's a lot of benefit. If you're not so strong, it's not as big a payout. Whereas with traits are conducive to, say, prestige or influence, people may seek your advice even if you're not the most knowledgeable, but perhaps you're more knowledgeable than them, and so they can benefit from you. But it's all speculation. I don't know. I just sort of noticed that recently. I actually published those before even realizing that really the trends across quartiles for the 2 status measures are quite different.
Do you find differences in who engages in fights? So I mean, it might be only the top quartile of men in who would win a fight are the ones who are actually getting in fights.
Most reported, I hadn't observed too many, but from informants, discussion with informants where I asked them to describe to me all the conflicts that occurred in this community. And this is in addition to asking individuals getting self-report about conflicts. But from informants, the physical fights tended to involve some more high-status, dominant individuals more often than not. Yeah, it wasn't exclusively the larger men.
Following up with that, do you know something about what the distributions of dominance and prestige are like? So, I mean, you chunked them into quartiles, but are they meaningful categories to that? I mean, are a few guys just way stronger than everyone else, and you can cut the last 75% into quartiles, but they're really not much different from each other, or are they meaningful differences?
There are definitely individuals in these communities who are superlative in all the traits. And sort of why I think you saw that the prestige measure mediating the effect of dominance in describing offspring. So while the 2 status measures are predicted by different sets of traits, that said, certain individuals happen to be superlative in lots of traits. And so it's very clear who this handful of people are in each village. And then below them, sure, there are people who have their fingers more just in local politics. And,
I
so sort of
guess-
the
I guess what I was getting at is sort of skew within each category. So for each, you've got a rank order of prestige. Is each guy 5% more prestigious than the other one?
Oh, I
Whereas
gotcha.
dominance, they're all about the same, and then the top guy is just way more dominant.
So I've generated Gini coefficients for the status
Right,
measures,
yeah.
measure of inequality. One would be perfectly equal, and 0 perfectly unequal. No, other way around. Yeah, 1 perfectly unequal, 0 perfectly equal, and they were like 0.2, 0.3. So some, to give you perspective, I think that household income inequality in the U.S. you get a Gini is over 0.4. So some inequality in distribution of these status traits.
Question about the social status and allowances. In your measure, you measure the higher status guy can get a lot of help when they are sick or in need of help from their ILS. What about the other women? I just wonder whether they're getting support because they have more resources that they can offer to others, so that they are reciprocated back by the others than the lower status guy.
Yeah, so I found generally, looking at a bunch of things, whether it's sharing of food, that there wasn't any evidence of direct reciprocation. So some of these higher status guys were more generous, weren't being paid back with more food, at least in the short term. But there is some evidence from the ACHE, and my advisors looked at this and found that those who are more generous with food are reciprocated out of kind with another currency, that being help when they're sick. And so he's arguing that sometimes giving is not just for direct reciprocity, but as a form of insurance. So you develop a reputation as somebody who's generous, somebody who is important, other people, you have value to other people, and then in times of need, you'll get that help.
But those guys does not necessarily have the higher social status.
The guys who are
Generous.
generous,
They correlate?
in my data they did, yeah.
More questions?